The ache in my feet was a dull, familiar throb, a constant companion to the frantic rhythm of my heart. It was a baseline of discomfort I had learned to live with, much like the faded floral wallpaper in my apartment and the persistent scent of mildew in the hallway. Tonight, however, the physical pain was a distant echo of the screaming panic that had taken up residence in my chest. Each step I took across the worn crimson carpet of Trattoria Bellucci felt like wading through cement. The clinking of cutlery, the low murmur of conversation, the warm, garlicky air. It was all a muffled backdrop to the single deafening thought that played on a loop in my mind. I have nothing. The phone call had come just before my shift. Dr. Albright's voice, usually a calm and reassuring baritone, had been laced with a gentle but firm finality. "Alara," she'd said, "we have an opening for your mother's treatment. The new protocol. It's next Tuesday, but we'll need the initial deposit by Friday to hold the spot. I'm sorry, but there's a long waiting list." Friday, 2 days away? The deposit was $10,000, an astronomical sum that might as well have been 10 million. It was the nest egg I had spent 3 years building, working double shifts here, taking on extra cleaning jobs, sacrificing every scrap of a social life, every moment of rest. It was the money I had given to Mark, my ex-boyfriend, to hold for me, foolishly believing his promises that he'd keep it safe in his high-interest account, away from my own temptation to dip into it for bills. And then, his call, an hour after the doctor's. His voice was a pathetic, watery thing, choked with the kind of performative guilt I knew so well. "I'm so sorry, Alara. I thought I could double it. Just one good hand, that's all I needed. It was a sure thing." A sure thing. He had gambled away my mother's future on a sure thing. The receiver had felt slick and cold in my hand as the world tilted on its axis. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't cried. I had simply hung up, a terrifying, hollow calm settling over me. The panic came later, a slow-building tsunami that was now cresting, threatening to pull me under right here in the middle of a dinner service. "Miss, another bottle of the Barolo, please." The voice was smooth, impatient. I forced a smile onto my face, a brittle thing I was sure would crack. "Of course, sir. Right away." I turned, my professional waitress mask sliding perfectly into place, hiding the desperate nursing student who was failing the one person she was supposed to care for. My mother's face swam in my vision, her tired smile, the pale, translucent quality of her skin, the hope in her eyes when I'd told her about the new treatment. Hope I had just allowed to be extinguished. My section was busy, a mix of tourists and regulars, but my focus kept being drawn to the corner booth, the one usually reserved for Mr. Bellucci's special guests. Tonight, it was occupied by two men. One was large and silent, with a shaved head and the impassive stillness of a stone statue. The other man? Him, I knew. Not personally, of course. I knew him the way everyone in this city knew him. Damien Salvatore. His name was a whisper in tabloids, a shadow in financial reports, a ghost in crime scene summaries. He was a creature of myth and menace, his legitimate businesses, real estate, shipping, rumored to be a pristine white tablecloth spread over a table of blood and iron. He looked nothing like the monster from the stories. He was younger than I expected, maybe in his early 30s, with dark hair that fell in a carefully careless way across his forehead. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than my entire nursing school tuition, the fabric stretching taut across broad shoulders. He wasn't handsome in the conventional smiling way of movie stars. His features were too sharp for that, his jaw too severe, his mouth a straight, unyielding line. But there was a magnetic pull to him, an intensity in the way he surveyed the room, his dark eyes missing nothing. He moved with an economy of motion, a predatory grace that was both captivating and deeply unsettling. He was a predator, and like all the most dangerous predators, he was beautiful. I refilled their water glasses, my hands steady by some miracle of muscle memory. His eyes flickered up to me for a fraction of a second, and the contact was like a low-voltage shock. They weren't black, as I'd imagined, but a deep, turbulent gray, like a storm-tossed sea. There was no warmth in them, only assessment. He saw a waitress, a uniform, a pair of hands filling his glass. He didn't see the terror, the desperation, the screaming void where my hope used to be. I was invisible. I retreated, my heart hammering for a different reason now. It was as I was passing the adjacent booth, tucked away in a shadowed alcove, that I caught the words. The two men there were speaking in low, guttural tones, leaning close over their plates of untouched pasta. They looked like they belonged in a back alley, not in a place like this, even one as faded as Bellucci's. "He's exposed," one of them rasped, a man with a scar that bisected his left eyebrow. "Julian is with him, but the car is 2 blocks down. The alleyway exit is covered." The other man, beefier and balding, grunted. "The signal is when he stands to leave. Santino's guys will move on the front, we take the back. It has to look like a robbery gone wrong. Ricci wants it clean." Ricci. The name was another whisper, another ghost story. The Ricci family were Damien Salvatore's main rivals, a notoriously vicious crew from the South Side. My blood ran cold. They were talking about him, about Damien Salvatore. They were going to kill him, right here. My first instinct was to run, to hide in the kitchen, pretend I heard nothing. It wasn't my business. This was his world, a world of violence and retribution I had no place in. Getting involved was a death sentence. I should just keep my head down, finish my shift, and go home to my empty apartment and my empty bank account. But then, a different instinct took over, the one that had pushed me into nursing in the first place. The instinct to help, to intervene, to prevent harm. It was a stupid, reckless impulse. But as I glanced back at Damien Salvatore, I didn't see a monster. I saw a man about to be ambushed. A man who was going to die because no one had the courage to warn him. My mind raced, a frantic scramble of impossible options. Scream? They would shoot me first. Tell Mr. Bellucci? He was a good man, but he was old and terrified of the city's underbelly. He would freeze. Call the police? By the time they arrived, it would be over. I needed to do something subtle, something that wouldn't draw attention. My eyes landed on the small notepad in my apron pocket. My hand, slick with nervous sweat, fumbled for my pen. My handwriting was shaky, the letters jagged with adrenaline. I kept it simple, direct. 5 words. They're here for you. Don't turn around. The moment came when I went to clear their appetizer plates. My whole body was trembling, a leaf in a hurricane. This was insane. This was suicide. But the image of my mother's frail form in her hospital bed flashed in my mind. My life was already a wreck. What was one more catastrophic mistake? I approached their table, my gaze fixed on the porcelain plates. "Is everything to your satisfaction, Mr. Salvatore?" I asked, my voice miraculously even. He nodded, a curt, dismissive gesture, already engrossed in his quiet conversation with the monolith he called Julian. My heart was a wild bird beating against my ribs. With one hand, I gathered the plates. With the other, the one holding the folded note, I moved with a speed and stealth I didn't know I possessed. As my left hand lifted his plate, my right slipped the small piece of paper onto the pristine white tablecloth where the plate had been. It was a whisper of a movement, over in a second. I didn't dare look at his face. I turned and walked away, my legs feeling like they were made of lead and glass. Each step was an eternity. I expected a shout, a hand on my shoulder, the cold touch of steel against my spine. Nothing. I reached the relative safety of the kitchen doors, pushing through them and leaning against the cool metal, my lungs heaving. The clatter of pots and the shouts of the chefs were a welcome cacophony. I risked a glance back through the small circular window. I saw Damien Salvatore pause, his hand hovering over his wineglass. He looked down. I saw his body go utterly still for a single, terrifying beat. He didn't look up. He didn't scan the room. He simply picked up the note with 2 fingers, unfolded it below the level of the table, and read it. His expression didn't change, but a subtle tension radiated from him, a tightening in his shoulders, a hardening of his jaw. He folded the note again, slipped it into his pocket, and then, impossibly, he took a slow, deliberate sip of his wine. He resumed his conversation with Julian as if he had just read a stock market update. It was the most chilling display of control I had ever witnessed. A few minutes later, he signaled for the check. I couldn't be the one to take it to him. I was too raw, too exposed. I asked Maria, another waitress, to handle it, claiming a sudden dizzy spell. I watched from the kitchen as she collected the leather billfold. Damien and Julian rose, not with the hurried panic of men in danger, but with a leisurely, unconcerned air. They didn't head for the front door or the back alley. Instead, they walked directly towards the kitchen. My blood turned to ice. They were coming for me. The kitchen door swung open. Mr. Bellucci was shouting about a risotto order when he saw Damien Salvatore and fell silent. The entire kitchen staff froze. Damien's gaze swept the room and landed on me. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement. I know. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, not to me, but towards the service exit that led into the main restaurant hallway, away from the front and back doors the men in the alcove were watching. Then he and Julian turned and disappeared back into the restaurant. A moment later, I heard a commotion from the dining room, a loud crash, a woman's scream. It was a distraction. While everyone's attention was on the staged accident, he was gone. The rest of my shift passed in a blur of surreal fear. The 2 men from the alcove paid their bill and left in a hurry, their faces tight with frustration. The police came and went, investigating the robbery gone wrong that had been reported after a table was overturned, but no one was hurt and nothing was stolen. By the time I was wiping down the last table, my adrenaline had given way to a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. I had survived. He had survived. It was over. I collected my meager tips, changed out of my uniform, and stepped out into the cool night air, pulling my thin jacket tight around me. I just wanted to go home, crawl into bed, and pretend this entire night, this entire life, wasn't happening to me. My apartment was a 20-minute walk through a part of the city that had long been forgotten by street lamp maintenance crews. I usually walked quickly, keys clutched in my fist like a makeshift weapon, but tonight my legs were heavy. The hollow feeling was back, the reality of my situation crashing down on me again, my mother, the money, Mark. My act of reckless bravery in the restaurant felt foolish now, a pointless gesture in a life already spiraling out of control. What had I accomplished? I had saved a dangerous man I didn't know, for reasons I didn't understand. And in return, I was still broke, still hopeless, and still walking home alone in the dark. A flicker of headlights in my periphery made me jump. A car was idling at the corner, its engine a low, expensive purr. I quickened my pace, my heart starting to pound again. Then another pair of headlights flared to life behind me, and another to my side, pulling out from a darkened alley. In seconds, I was surrounded. 3 sleek black SUVs, their tinted windows like the eyes of soulless beasts, had formed a silent, impenetrable cage around me on the deserted street. They were utterly silent, their engines barely a whisper. This wasn't the police. This wasn't a random mugging. This was surgical. This was professional. Panic, cold and sharp, seized my throat. I was trapped. My mind screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. The passenger door of the car in front of me opened. A figure emerged, and in the sterile glow of the headlights I recognized the monolithic form of Julian, Damien Salvatore's silent guardian. He stood there, his hands clasped loosely in front of him, his expression as unreadable as ever. He wasn't armed, or at least, he wasn't showing it, but he was more intimidating than any man with a gun I could imagine. "Alara Vance," he said. It wasn't a question. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble, devoid of any emotion. It was the first time I had heard him speak. I couldn't find my own voice. I just stared, my mind a blank slate of terror. "Mr. Salvatore would like a word with you," he continued, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "Please, get in the car." This was it. This was the price for my interference. I had thought saving his life would earn me a thank you, maybe even the ridiculously large tip I saw Maria pocket earlier. I hadn't considered the alternative, that in his world, witnesses were liabilities. Loose ends were tied up, permanently. My legs refused to move. I was paralyzed, a deer caught not just in headlights, but in an inescapable trap of steel and shadow. Julian seemed to sense my fear, though his expression didn't soften. "No harm will come to you," he stated, as if declaring a fact of nature like gravity or the rising of the sun. "You have my employer's word. He merely wishes to express his gratitude and to discuss the consequences of your actions." Consequences. The word hung in the air, heavy and ominous. He gestured towards the open door of the SUV, an invitation that was undeniably a command. Taking a shaky breath, feeling as if I were stepping off a cliff into a bottomless abyss, I moved. I walked towards the black car, leaving my old life behind on that cracked and grimy pavement. The heavy door closed with a solid, definitive thud, sealing me inside, sealing my fate. The interior of the SUV was another world. The scent of rich leather and subtle, clean cologne replaced the city's grime. The silence was absolute, insulating me from the outside world. I sat on the plush seat, my worn handbag clutched in my lap like a useless shield. Julian got in the front passenger seat, and the vehicle pulled away smoothly, the other 2 SUVs falling into formation around us. A dark honor, guard escorting me to my judgment. We drove for what felt like hours, leaving my familiar, struggling neighborhood far behind. We moved into the wealthier parts of the city, the streets clean and wide, lined with manicured trees and grand historic brownstones. Then we ascended, climbing the winding roads of the hills that overlooked the entire metropolis. The convoy finally slowed and passed through a set of immense, wrought-iron gates that opened for us without a sound. A long private driveway snaked through a landscape of sculpted gardens and ancient oak trees, culminating in a house that wasn't a house. It was a fortress of glass and steel and stone, a marvel of modern architecture perched on the edge of the cliff, commanding a breathtaking view of the glittering city below. This was a bastion of power, a monument to a fortune I couldn't begin to comprehend. This was Damien Salvatore's world. Julian led me through a pair of massive oak doors into a foyer that was larger than my entire apartment building. The floors were polished black marble that reflected the soft, recessed lighting like a dark, still lake. A grand staircase seemed to float upwards along one wall, and the opposite wall was a sheet of glass, 2 stories high, showcasing the sprawling, diamond-dusted tapestry of the city. Priceless-looking art, abstract and vibrant, adorned the walls. The air was cool and still, carrying a faint scent of something clean and masculine, like sandalwood and rain. The sheer scale of the wealth was disorienting. It was designed to intimidate, to make one feel small and insignificant. It was working. He led me through an archway into a vast living area. The furniture was minimalist and modern, all clean lines and rich textures in shades of gray, black, and cream. A fireplace, long and low, flickered with gas-fed flames, casting a warm glow on the room. And there, standing in front of the wall of glass with his back to me, was Damien Salvatore. He was holding a glass of amber liquid, swirling it gently as he stared out at his kingdom. He had removed his suit jacket, and he stood in a crisp white shirt and dark trousers. The fabric of his shirt strained slightly against the powerful muscles of his back and shoulders. Even from behind, he radiated an aura of absolute control. "Leave us, Julian," he said, his voice calm and low, yet it echoed in the cavernous space. Julian gave a short nod and disappeared as silently as he had arrived. The quiet that descended was heavy, thick with unspoken questions and my own ragged fear. I stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, feeling like a stray animal brought in from the storm, my cheap clothes and worn-out shoes a jarring note of poverty in the symphony of opulence. He finally turned to face me. His gray eyes were intense, pinning me in place from across the room. He took a slow sip from his glass before setting it down on a nearby table with a soft click. "Alara Vance," he said, his voice like aged whiskey, smooth, but with a definite bite. 24 years old? Nursing student at City College, carrying a 3.8 grade point average, waitress at Trattoria Bellucci for the last 3 years. Your mother, Helen Vance, is at St. Jude's Memorial, awaiting a new experimental treatment for her degenerative neurological condition. A treatment that requires a $10,000 deposit by Friday. He paused, letting the weight of his knowledge settle on me. A deposit you no longer have, thanks to the gambling addiction of your former boyfriend, Mark Renshaw. Every word was a physical blow, stripping me bare, laying out the pathetic, desperate details of my life for his inspection. He knew everything. The realization was terrifying. It wasn't just that he was powerful, it was the reach of his power. The casual way he could peel back the layers of a person's life, as if they were nothing. How do you know all that?" I whispered, my voice hoarse. A flicker of something, not quite a smile, more a grim acknowledgement, touched his lips. "It's my business to know things, especially about people who saved my life." He took a step closer, and I fought the urge to step back. "Your warning was timely. The Ricci family is getting bold. They thought they could catch me off guard. They were mistaken. Thanks to you." I just overheard them," I stammered. I didn't think. I just acted." "You acted with more courage than most men I know," he said, his gaze unwavering. "And for that, you have my gratitude. But you also acted with a recklessness that has now put you in danger. My blood ran cold again. What do you mean? Those men saw you. They saw you at my table. Now that their plan has failed, they will review every detail of the evening. They will look for the anomaly, the reason for the failure, the reason I was alerted. They will eventually come to you, the waitress who was just a little too close, a little too observant. The Ricci family does not forgive mistakes, and they do not leave loose ends. The fear I had felt on the street returned, tenfold. He wasn't threatening me. He was telling me a fact. I was a target now. My stupid, impulsive act of humanity had marked me for death. I felt my knees weaken, a wave of dizziness washing over me. What am I supposed to do? I asked, the words barely a breath. This was the moment. He closed the remaining distance between us, standing so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. I had to tilt my head back to look up at him. His proximity was overwhelming, his scent, his sheer physical presence. You will do what I say, he said, his voice dropping to a low, commanding murmur. I have a proposition for you, Alara. He gestured to one of the plush sofas. Sit. It was an order, and I obeyed numbly, sinking into the soft cushions. He remained standing, looming over me, a figure of immense power and authority. I am going to solve your problems, all of them. As of an hour ago, the $10,000 deposit was wired to St. Jude's Memorial. Your mother's treatment is secured. Furthermore, a fund has been established to cover all of her future medical expenses, indefinitely. I stared at him, my mind unable to process the words. It felt like a dream. The crushing weight that had been suffocating me for months, for years, suddenly vanished. My mother was safe. She was going to get the help she needed. Tears pricked my eyes, blurring his sharp silhouette. Why? I choked out. Why would you do that? Gratitude is a debt I always repay, he said simply. But my proposition comes with conditions. This is not charity. My fleeting hope curdled. Of course, men like him did nothing for free. There was always a price. What do you want? I asked, bracing myself. I want your compliance, he said, his eyes boring into mine. As I said, you are in danger. The Ricci family will come for you. Therefore, you cannot go back to your apartment. You cannot go back to your job. You cannot go back to your life. Not for now. What are you saying? I whispered, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs with a new kind of fear. You will stay here, in this house. You will be under my protection 24 hours a day. My security is the best in the world. Here, you will be untouchable. You will have everything you need. Clothes, food, anything you desire. You will continue your studies online, but you will not leave these grounds without my permission and without my security. The words hung in the air, beautiful and terrifying. He was offering me a sanctuary that was also a prison, a gilded cage. He was offering to save me by taking my freedom. For how long? I asked, my voice trembling. For as long as the threat exists, he answered, his tone leaving no room for argument. For as long as I deem it necessary. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog of shock and disbelief. And what about Mark? He'll be looking for me. Damien's expression hardened, a flicker of something cold and dangerous in his eyes. Mark Renshaw is no longer your concern. He has been persuaded to leave the city, permanently. He will not bother you again. The finality in his voice was absolute. He had erased my ex-boyfriend from my life as easily as he had paid my mother's medical bills. It was another demonstration of his terrifying power, his ability to manipulate the world to his will. I looked around the vast empty room, at the cold marble and the stark modern furniture. It was beautiful, but it felt sterile, devoid of warmth or life. The thought of being trapped here, a prisoner of the man who had saved me, was suffocating. I can't, I said, finding a sliver of my old defiance. You can't just kidnap me and lock me away. He didn't get angry. He simply watched me, his expression unreadable. Then he sighed, a quiet, weary sound, and sat in the armchair opposite me. The action surprised me, bringing him down to my level. It was a subtle shift in the power dynamic. I'm not kidnapping you, Ilara. I'm protecting you. There's a difference. He leaned forward, his forearms resting on his knees, his gaze intense and serious. Maybe you don't understand the world you've stepped into. Let me explain it to you. His voice was low, hypnotic, as he began to speak. When I was 10 years old, my family was at war with another family, the Falcones. They were old school, brutal. My father, he was like me, powerful, confident, maybe too confident. He received a threat, a letter saying they were going to come for his family, for my mother. He paused, and for the first time I saw a flicker of raw emotion in his stormy gray eyes, a deep, ancient pain. My father dismissed it. Arrogance. He believed his walls were high enough, his men loyal enough. He thought he was untouchable. One afternoon, my mother was in the garden. She loved her roses. It was a beautiful day. She sent me inside to get her a glass of water. His voice grew tight, strained. When I came back out, she was gone. They had taken her. The Falcones sent my father pieces of her, for a week, to make a point. A wave of nausea washed over me. I felt the blood drain from my face. My father fell apart, Damien continued. His eyes focused on something far away, a memory he was reliving. Our entire organization nearly crumbled. I learned a lesson that day, Ilara. A lesson written in my mother's blood. You do not underestimate a threat. You do not leave the people you are responsible for vulnerable. You protect what is yours, at any cost. You build higher walls. You trust no one. And you never, ever show mercy to those who would harm your family. He looked at me then, and the full force of his conviction, his pain, hit me. You saved my life tonight. In my world, that makes you my responsibility. That makes you part of my family in a way. The Ricci family is a threat. I will not underestimate them. I will not make the same mistake my father made. I will not let what happened to my mother happen to you. His story wasn't just a justification. It was a plea. He was showing me the wound that drove him, the tragedy that had forged him into this hard, ruthless, obsessively protective man. He was explaining why this gilded cage was, in his mind, the only option. He saw protecting me as a sacred duty, a way to atone for his father's failure, to quiet the ghosts of his past. The tears that had been threatening finally fell, tracing silent paths down my cheeks. They weren't just tears of fear anymore. They were tears of confusion, of empathy for the boy who had lost his mother, and of a strange, terrifying gratitude. He was offering me a devil's bargain, but he was also offering me something I hadn't had in a very long time: safety. A world without the constant, grinding fear of bills I couldn't pay, of a mother I couldn't save, of a weak man who would always let me down. I will give you a choice, he said softly, his voice pulling me from my thoughts. You can walk out that door right now. Julian will drive you wherever you want to go. I will not stop you. The money for your mother's treatment will remain in place. Consider it a gift, but you will be on your own, and they will find you. It might not be tomorrow or next week, but they will. Or, he paused, his gaze locking with mine. You can stay. You can accept my protection. You can live in a world where you never have to be afraid again. The choice is yours, Ilara. I looked from his intense, haunted face to the wall of glass, at the city glittering like a bed of scattered jewels below. Out there was my life, a life of struggle, of fear, of constant gnawing anxiety. A life where I was utterly alone. In here, in this beautiful prison, was safety, protection, a strange, dangerous kind of peace. It was no choice at all, really. It was a surrender. Okay, I whispered, the single word feeling like the most significant one I had ever spoken. I'll stay. A subtle relaxing of the tension in his shoulders was his only reaction. He stood up, once again the master of his domain. Good, he said. Julian will show you to your room. We'll talk more in the morning. He turned and walked away, leaving me alone on the sofa, the weight of my decision settling over me like a shroud made of silk and steel. I had just traded my freedom for my life, and I had no idea if I had made the right choice. The days that followed were a surreal blend of luxury and confinement. Julian led me to a suite of rooms that were larger and more opulent than any five-star hotel I could have imagined. There was a bedroom with a king-sized bed piled high with pillows and a duvet as soft as a cloud, a sitting room with its own fireplace and a view of the gardens, and a bathroom clad in Italian marble with a tub deep enough to swim in. A walk-in closet was already filled with clothes in my size. Soft cashmere sweaters, silk blouses, tailored trousers, and even comfortable lounge sets. It was a princess's fantasy, but the windows didn't open more than a few inches, and a discreet, armed guard was always stationed in the hallway. The gilded cage was complete. Damien was a phantom presence in the first few days. I would catch glimpses of him, striding down a hallway on his phone, his voice a low, urgent murmur, or see him in the dining room for a solitary breakfast. His attention fixed on a tablet displaying endless columns of numbers. He left me alone, giving me space to acclimate to my new reality. The house was run by a small, silent staff who moved with quiet efficiency, anticipating my needs before I even voiced them. Meals appeared, my room was kept immaculate, and a laptop and all the necessary materials for my online classes were provided. On the surface, it was a perfect life. But the silence was deafening, the isolation profound. I spent my time studying, reading from the vast library, and walking through the meticulously manicured gardens. The grounds were expansive, a lush paradise of green lawns, vibrant flower beds, and even a tranquil koi pond. But they were enclosed by a stone wall that was at least 12 feet high, its top glinting with the subtle menace of security wire. I was a pampered prisoner, and the constant presence of Damien's security team, men in dark suits who communicated through earpieces, was a perpetual reminder of my situation. They were polite, even kind, but their eyes were always watchful. I was being protected, but I was also being watched. The threat that had put me here felt distant, an abstract concept. But then, one evening, it became terrifyingly real. I was in the library trying to focus on a chapter about cardiovascular pharmacology when Damien strode in. He was in his usual suit, but his tie was loosened, and his face was set in grim lines. "We need to talk," he said, his voice tight. He didn't wait for a reply, simply turning and expecting me to follow. He led me to his office, a room I hadn't seen before. It was a space of dark wood, leather, and technology. One wall was covered in a bank of monitors displaying security feeds from every corner of the property and various locations across the city. He gestured to one of the screens. It showed a grainy black and white image of the street outside my old apartment building. A dark sedan was parked across the street. Two men were inside, their faces obscured by shadows, but their attention was clearly fixed on the building's entrance. "They've been there for 2 days," Damien said, his voice a low growl. "They've been asking questions in the neighborhood, showing your picture around." A chill snaked down my spine. I stared at the screen, at the shadowy figures hunting for me. They were real. The danger was real. "Those are Ricci's men?" "Yes," he confirmed. "They're not subtle. They want to send a message. They want you, because they think you're my weakness." He turned from the monitors to look at me, his gray eyes blazing with a cold fire. "This is why you are here. This is why you must stay here. Do you understand, Ilara? Out there, you are a target. In here, you are safe." His words, meant to reassure, only amplified my fear. The gilded cage no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a fortress, a necessary shield against the monsters outside the walls. My resentment at my confinement evaporated, replaced by a raw, primal fear and a surge of gratitude for the very man who was holding me captive. He had been right. His paranoia, his control, it was all justified. He was keeping me alive. That night, the dynamic between us shifted. The threat was no longer a story he had told me. It was a live feed on a security monitor. He began joining me for dinner. Our conversations were stilted at first. We talked about my studies, about the books in his library, about neutral, safe topics. But slowly, tentatively, we began to peel back the layers. I learned that his legitimate businesses were, in fact, incredibly successful. He was a brilliant strategist, a shrewd investor. He spoke of logistics and global markets with a passion that was almost startling. It was a side of him that seemed completely at odds with the ruthless crime boss from the whispers and rumors. He, in turn, asked me about nursing. He was a surprisingly good listener, his intense gaze focused on me as I spoke about my passion for medicine, for helping people. He seemed fascinated by a world so different from his own, a world of healing rather than harming. "You want to fix people," he said one evening, a curious, almost wistful look on his face. "I spend my life breaking them." The admission was stark, brutal, and honest. It was in these moments of unguarded truth that I began to see past the intimidating facade to the complex, wounded man beneath. The attraction I had felt in the restaurant, the magnetic pull of his power, began to deepen into something more confusing, more dangerous. It was a terrifying cocktail of fear and fascination, gratitude and a burgeoning affection I refused to name. The external threat escalated. The war with the Ricci family, which had been a cold one, was heating up. I witnessed it not in violence, but in the tension that permeated the house. The number of guards on the property doubled. Men in dark suits came and went at all hours, their meetings with Damien held behind the closed doors of his office. I would hear his voice, sharp and commanding, barking orders into his phone in clipped Italian. He grew more distant, more preoccupied, the lines of stress deepening around his eyes. He started carrying a gun, a sleek black pistol tucked into a holster at the small of his back, a constant, chilling reminder of the violence that underpinned his world. One night, I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet, but a storm was raging outside, the wind howling like a tormented spirit. I wandered downstairs to the kitchen for a glass of water and found Damien in the cavernous living room, standing before the great glass wall, staring out at the storm-lashed city. He hadn't heard me approach. In the dim light from the fireplace, he looked weary, the weight of his empire pressing down on his broad shoulders. "You should be sleeping," he said without turning around. "So should you," I countered softly, walking to stand a few feet away from him. He finally turned to look at me. His face was pale, his jaw tight. There was a fresh cut on his cheekbone, a thin line of angry red against his skin. My nursing instincts flared. "What happened?" I asked, taking a step closer. "Business," he said, his voice rough. It was a dismissal, but I ignored it. "Let me see," I insisted, reaching out. He flinched slightly at my touch, but didn't pull away. I gently tilted his face towards the firelight. The cut was clean, but deep. "You need to clean that. It could get infected." He looked down at me, his gray eyes searching my face. I saw surprise in them, and something else, something softer. "I'm fine," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "No, you're not," I said, my tone firm. "Come on, sit down." To my astonishment, he did. He sat on the edge of the sofa, watching me with a strange intensity as I hurried to the kitchen to find the first aid kit I knew was kept in one of the pantries. When I returned, he was still there, his posture rigid, his hands clenched into fists on his knees. I knelt in front of him, dabbing at the cut with an antiseptic wipe. He hissed as it stung. "Sorry," I whispered. "It's nothing." He grunted, but he didn't move. He just watched me, his gaze so heavy it felt like a physical touch. The air between us was thick with unspoken things. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the drumming of the rain against the glass. I was so close I could see the faint stubble on his jaw, the tiny lines fanning out from the corners of his eyes. I could feel the heat of his body, smell the scent of rain, leather, and his own unique, masculine scent. My heart was beating a frantic, unsteady rhythm. As I applied a small bandage, my fingers brushed against his skin. A current, hot and sharp, shot up my arm. His breath hitched. I looked up and found his eyes fixed on my mouth. The world seemed to shrink, contracting to the space between us. The house, the storm, the danger, it all faded away. There was only the heat, the tension, the pull that was becoming impossible to deny. He lifted a hand, his fingers hesitating for a moment before they gently cupped my jaw. His thumb stroked my cheek, his touch surprisingly soft for a man whose hands were so capable of violence. "Alara," he breathed, his voice a rough whisper. And then he leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was hungry, desperate, a release of all the tension and danger and fear that had been building for weeks. It was a kiss of possession, of a man claiming something he had protected, something he had come to see as his. I should have been scared. I should have pulled away. But I didn't. I melted into him, my hands coming up to grip his shoulders as I kissed him back with a ferocity that surprised me. It was a surrender, an acknowledgement of the dangerous, undeniable truth that had been growing in the heart of my gilded cage. I was no longer just his prisoner. I was falling for my captor. The kiss broke as abruptly as it began. He pulled back, his breathing ragged, his eyes dark with a turbulent mix of emotions. He looked at me as if he were seeing me for the first time, a look of shock and dawning realization on his face. He stood up suddenly, putting distance between us, and ran a hand through his hair. This is a mistake," he muttered, his back to me. "I'm sorry." He strode out of the room without another word, leaving me kneeling on the floor, my lips still tingling, my body humming with a strange and terrifying energy. He was right. It was a mistake. But it was a mistake I knew, with a sinking certainty, that I wanted to make again. The next few days were excruciatingly awkward. Damien avoided me completely. He took his meals in his office, and if we passed in a hallway, he would give me a curt nod and walk away before I could speak. The kiss lingered between us, a ghost in the vast, silent house. His rejection, though I knew it was for the best, stung more than I wanted to admit. I felt adrift, confused. I had accepted my confinement, grown accustomed to the strange rhythm of my new life, but now the foundation of it had been shaken. The man who was my protector, my warden, the sole focus of my isolated world, was now a stranger again. The war outside the walls reached its peak. One evening, Julian appeared at the door of the library where I was studying. His face, usually an impassive mask, was grim. "Mr. Salvatore is leaving," he said. "He asked me to tell you to stay in your suite tonight. Do not leave it for any reason. The house is on full lockdown." A cold dread washed over me. "What's happening, Julian?" He hesitated, his professional reserve warring with something else. "He's ending it," he said finally. "The situation with the Ricci family, tonight." He was going out to fight. The thought was terrifying. The cut on his cheek was proof that he was not invincible. I thought of him lying hurt somewhere, or worse. The idea was a physical pain in my chest. "Will he be okay?" I whispered. Julian's expression was one of absolute faith. "He always is," he said, but for the first time I heard a flicker of uncertainty in his voice. I did as I was told, locking myself in my suite. The silence of the house was different tonight. It was a tense, waiting silence. I couldn't study. I couldn't read. I paced the floor of my beautiful room like a caged animal, my gaze constantly drawn to the window, to the city lights that seemed to mock my helplessness. He was out there, in that violent world, fighting a war I couldn't comprehend, partly because of me. I was the weakness the Ricci family had tried to exploit. My existence had escalated this conflict. The responsibility was a crushing weight. Hours crawled by. Midnight came and went. I tried to sleep but couldn't. Every sound from the hallway made me jump. Finally, just before dawn, I heard the faint purr of engines in the driveway. I rushed to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. The fleet of black SUVs was back. Men poured out, moving with a grim, exhausted efficiency. And then I saw him. Damien emerged from the lead vehicle. He was moving stiffly, his left arm held tight against his side. Even from a distance, I could see his suit jacket was torn and stained with something dark. Julian was at his side, his face etched with concern. I didn't think. I flew from my room, ignoring the guard in the hall who started to protest before I shot past him. I ran down the grand staircase, my bare feet silent on the cold marble. I reached the foyer just as Damien and Julian walked through the door. Damien stopped short when he saw me. He looked utterly spent. His face was bruised, his hair was disheveled, and his crisp white shirt was splattered with blood. A dark, wet patch was spreading from a wound on his side. "I told you to stay in your room," he rasped, his voice strained with pain and exhaustion. "You're hurt," I said, my own voice trembling. I rushed to his side, my nursing instincts overriding everything else. "Julian, help me get him to the living room. Lay him on the sofa." For once, Julian didn't look to Damien for orders. He looked at me, saw the determination in my eyes, and simply nodded, guiding his boss towards the living area. Damien slumped onto the sofa with a pained groan, his face pale. "Get the first aid kit," I ordered Julian, "and bring towels and a bowl of warm water, and whiskey. A lot of it." Julian, the stoic, unshakable lieutenant, simply said, "Yes, ma'am," and hurried off to do my bidding. I turned back to Damien. "We have to get this jacket and shirt off," I said, my voice taking on the calm, authoritative tone I used with my patients. He was bleeding badly. He nodded, gritting his teeth as I carefully peeled the ruined fabric away from the wound. It was a deep gash on his side, just above his hip. It looked like a knife wound. It wasn't life-threatening, but it was serious. "It's over," he said through clenched teeth as I began to clean the wound. "The Ricci family won't be a problem anymore." The finality of his statement was chilling. He had gone out into the night and erased his enemies. He had returned victorious, but wounded. I worked in silence, my hands surprisingly steady as I cleaned, disinfected, and stitched the gash with the suture kit from the comprehensive medical bag Julian had brought. Damien didn't flinch, but I could feel the tension in his body, the tight control he was exerting over his pain. He drank the whiskey I poured for him in 2 long swallows. When I was finished, I bandaged the wound tightly. "You need a doctor," I said softly. "You are a doctor," he murmured, his eyes closed. "Or close enough." He opened his eyes and looked at me. The weariness in them was profound, but underneath it was something else, a deep, burning intensity. "You weren't scared." "I was terrified," I admitted. "Not of the blood, of you not coming back." The admission hung in the air between us. It was the truth, stripped bare of all pretense. In that moment, he wasn't my captor and I wasn't his prisoner. We were just a man and a woman, connected by violence and a strange, unwilling intimacy. He reached up, his uninjured hand cupping my cheek. "I will always come back to you, Alara," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. And I knew, with a certainty that shook me to my core, that I believed him. I also knew that I never wanted him to leave again. The next morning, the cloud of danger that had hung over the house had lifted. The extra guards were gone. The tension was gone. There was a palpable sense of peace, of resolution. I woke up on the armchair in the living room, a blanket draped over me. Damien was asleep on the sofa, his breathing deep and even. Sometime during the night, I had fallen asleep watching over him. When he woke, he was stiff and sore, but the color had returned to his face. I helped him to his feet, and he leaned on me as we walked slowly up the stairs to his suite. I helped him shower and change his bandages, our movements practiced and intimate. The awkwardness from before completely gone, burned away by the events of the previous night. Later that day, he found me in the garden. The sun was shining, and the air was clean and fresh. He walked over to the bench where I was sitting, moving carefully because of his injury. He didn't sit down. He stood in front of me, his hands in his pockets. "It's over," he said again. "The threat is gone. You're safe now." I looked up at him, my heart sinking. I knew what was coming next. "You're free to go, Alara," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Julian can take you back to your apartment. It's been cleaned and secured. I've arranged for a private security detail to watch the building for the next few months just in case. Your mother's medical fund is permanent. Your tuition is paid through graduation. You can have your old life back." He was giving me everything he had promised. He was giving me my freedom. This was what I should have wanted. It was the moment I should have been dreaming of since the night I was brought here. But the thought of leaving, of walking out of these gates and never seeing him again, left me feeling hollow and cold. My old life. What was my old life? A shabby apartment, a mountain of debt, a constant state of fear. Here, in this gilded cage, I had been confined, but I had also been cared for, protected. I had found a strange kind of peace, and I had found him. I looked at his face, at the fading bruise on his cheek, the small bandage over the cut I had tended. I looked into his stormy gray eyes and saw a flicker of vulnerability, a deep-seated loneliness that mirrored my own. He was giving me a choice, the same one he had given me on the first night. But this time, it felt different. This time, I knew what I was choosing between. It wasn't just a choice between danger and safety. It was a choice between being alone and being with him. "I don't want my old life back," I said, my voice quiet but firm. He went very still. "What are you saying?" I stood up, closing the small space between us. I reached out and took his hand, my fingers lacing with his. "I'm saying that I don't want to go." I looked up into his eyes, laying my heart bare. "My life isn't out there anymore, Damien. I think it's here. With you. If you'll have me." A wave of emotion washed over his face. Shock, disbelief, and then a profound, breathtaking relief. The iron control he always maintained seemed to crumble, and in its place was a raw vulnerability that stole my breath. "Ilara," he said, his voice choked. "You don't have to do this. I'm not a good man. This world is a violent place." "I'm not afraid of your world," I said honestly. "The only thing I'm afraid of is facing it without you." He pulled me to him then, his uninjured arm wrapping around me, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. He buried his face in my hair, and I felt a shudder run through his powerful frame. "I don't deserve you," he muttered against my scalp. "But I'm not going to let you go." He pulled back slightly, his hands framing my face, his thumbs gently stroking my cheeks. "Stay with me, Ilara," he said, his voice a raw plea. "Not as my prisoner, not as someone I'm protecting out of obligation. Stay as my partner, as my everything." "Yes," I whispered, tears of joy and relief blurring my vision. "Yes." He kissed me then, and it was nothing like our first desperate, frantic kiss in the dark. This was a kiss of homecoming, a kiss of promises made and a future beginning. It was tender and deep, and full of all the words we hadn't been able to say. It was the seal on my conscious choice, my willing step into his world, not as a victim, but as a queen to her king. A few days later, he took me into his office. He sat me down in his large leather chair and walked over to a safe concealed behind a painting. He opened it and took out a small velvet-wrapped object. He came back and knelt before me, a gesture of deference that seemed so at odds with his commanding nature that it made my heart ache. "This was my mother's," he said, his voice soft as he unwrapped the velvet. Inside lay a locket, an intricate piece of silver and sapphire on a delicate chain. It was old and clearly cherished. She wore it every day. It was the only thing of hers the police recovered. He opened the locket. One side held a tiny, faded photograph of a beautiful woman with Damien's eyes. The other side was empty. "My father kept it locked away after she died," he continued, his gaze fixed on the locket. "He said it was too painful to look at, but I think he felt he no longer had the right to it, that he had failed her." He looked up at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I want you to have it. I want you to put your picture in it. I want it to be a symbol, that I will not fail you, that you are my family now, that I will spend the rest of my life protecting you, cherishing you." He carefully fastened the chain around my neck. The cool metal felt heavy against my skin, a tangible weight, a promise. I lifted my hand to touch it, my fingers tracing the intricate design. It was the most precious thing I had ever owned. "Damien," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "It's beautiful." "Not as beautiful as you?" he said, his voice filled with a reverence that humbled me. He stood up, pulling me to my feet and into his arms. "I love you, Alara Vance." The words settled into my soul, filling all the hollow, empty places. "I love you too, Damien Salvatore." The next week, I sat on the chaise lounge in our bedroom. It was our bedroom now, on the phone with my mother. Her voice was stronger than I had heard it in years, filled with an unshakable joy. "The doctors are amazed, Alara," she chirped. "They said the treatment is working better than they could have ever hoped. They're so optimistic." "Oh, baby, I feel like I've been given a second chance at life." "I don't know how you did it, how you found such a generous benefactor, but you tell your Mr. Salvatore that he has my eternal gratitude." I smiled, my gaze drifting to Damien, who was standing by the window, watching me with a soft, possessive look in his eyes. "I will, Mom. I'm so happy for you." "And you sound happy too, honey," she said, her voice knowing. "Happier than I've heard you in a long, long time." She was right. As I ended the call, a profound sense of peace settled over me. I walked over to Damien, wrapping my arms around his waist and resting my head against his strong back. He turned in my arms, enfolding me in his embrace. We stood together, looking out the massive window at the city spread out below us. It was no longer a glittering trap or a symbol of a world I couldn't reach. It was just a view. My home was here, in this house, in his arms. My past was a ghost, a story of a different person. My future was here, with this dangerous, complicated, protective man who had saved me in more ways than he would ever know. It all started with a desperate waitress, a powerful man, and a simple note on a slip of paper. It had been an act of reckless chance, but it had led me here. It had led me home.